Did you know that in one rock there are 10 million years? In each of them, our planet was inhabited by completely different creatures, from mammals to dinosaurs. But do we really know everything about these extinct animals? No way. Today you'll find out what kind of monsters roamed the earth long before the first humans appeared. What dinosaurs looked more like giant chickens than ferocious predators? And most importantly, why is it worth taking a trip back in time? About 245 million years ago, the Permian period was in full swing, and the first dinosaurs were just beginning to appear on Earth. Although the reptiles we're used to today actually descended from amphibians, they dominated the land long before the dinosaurs took over. Among them, a special place is occupied by a group of reptiles called Therapsids. And there's a very good reason for that. Therapsids were the first vertebrates with fur. That's right. Until that moment, mammals had been warm-blooded only for 60 million years. So Therapsids could easily have become the first furry ancestors of modern humans. At least if it wasn't for one tiny detail. The end of the Permian period was marked by the greatest mass extinction in the history of our planet.
Ow.
Of the 96% of species that died, Therapsids were no exception. Luckily, however, there was one survivor, or rather two. It was an ordinary shrew-like animal named Morganucodon, which gave rise to all later mammals. Fortunately, this mammal didn't look like any of the modern ones. There were no wool, fur, or even nipples. Instead, Morganucodon resembled a small rodent with sharp teeth and claws, excellent for catching insects. Probably he wouldn't even have dared to attack a person, but nature had other plans for him. During the Triassic period, Morganucodon began to quickly change. His offspring became larger, and some of them developed the ability to roar. Yes, mammals were finally becoming predators. True, this new species would hardly be able to hunt large prey, but small lizards were definitely within reach. Still, no one expected such changes because up until that point, mammals were exclusively herbivores. By the way, during the same period, another predator appeared on the planet, a relative of crocodiles. This was a kind of ancient equivalent of an anaconda named Postosuchus. Yes, at first glance it looks more like a dinosaur. But don't forget that reptiles and dinosaurs are not the same thing at all. The fact is that dinosaurs belong to the order of reptiles called ornithischians. As for the rest of the reptiles, they survive to this day and continue to actively hunt us. But let's get back to the ancient equivalent of an anaconda. Despite its impressive size, the Postosuchus had a huge drawback. Its neck was too thin, so the giant snake couldn't swallow large prey. Apparently, evolution decided to correct this situation. It's about 225 million years ago. The first turtles appeared on the planet. They hunted fish, but occasionally they also attacked mammals. Sometimes the turtle simply couldn't digest its prey, but that didn't bother the reptile at all. After all, it could live without food for several months. A few dozen million years later, mammals learned to fight back. Some of them grew the size of a bear, while others developed the ability to run fast. So nature had to level things off again. It created a new species, a horned dinosaur named Oryctolaphus. The mammal's life expectancy was only about 3 years, so it's likely that the baby simply didn't have time to grow up. However, Oryctolaphus was so successful that after 50 million years, it still existed on Earth. Only now, its descendants were real giants. By the way, it's thanks to such creatures that we can determine the age of rocks. For example, the youngest fossils found so far are about 70 million years old. Scientists believe that by that time, mammals had already learned to fly. That's where the bats came from. Okay, but when did the real predators appear? This happened slightly later. In the Cretaceous period, about 145 million years ago, a creature named Sarcosuchus ruled the Earth. Imagine a crocodile and a whale had a baby. Maybe not exactly like that, but this monster was equally terrifying both on land and in water. Its length reached almost 6 meters, and its jaws were equipped with teeth as long as bananas. But Sarcosuchus wasn't the only giant on the planet. The same Cretaceous period was home to Titanosaurus, a sauropod from the genus of dinosaurs. True, the monster's name is a bit misleading. In fact, Titanosaurus was a herbivore. Moreover, it was a kind of long-necked giraffe among dinosaurs. Even the largest individuals rarely exceeded 10 meters in length. But what about the T-Rex? Turns out that its reign of terror lasted only 3 million years. And that's nothing compared to the terrible Cenozoic era, which lasted 65 million years. First, a massive asteroid hit the Earth. This led to global climate change. Then there was a series of volcanic eruptions in the Deccan Traps region. All this resulted in the complete destruction of the ecosystem. In short, everything was like with COVID, but much worse. Although mammals survived, they weren't the only ones. Dinosaurs also managed to survive. True, they were no longer the same. With the exception of birds, all dinosaurs were either too small or too slow. Take, for example, Ankylosaurus was the size of a dog and spent most of its time looking for food. Such a creature couldn't possibly have lived to see our days. Or here, take a look at this bizarre dinosaur named Elpidiaurus. At first glance, it looks more like a chameleon, doesn't it? That's because Elpidiaurus was a kind of dinosaur that lived on trees, used his long tail to hold onto branches, while his front legs were looking for berries and leaves. Honestly, it's hard to imagine anything more pathetic than a dinosaur that climbs trees, but that's how things went. However, that wasn't the end of the great evolutionary race. Another 34 million years passed and the world saw the emergence of primates. These mammals gave rise to people, lemurs, and loris. Okay, but when did big game appear? Well, at the end of the Pliocene epoch, about 3 million years ago. The first representatives of the genus Homo appeared on the planet, but they weren't alone. The same epoch was home to Gigantopithecus, a gigantic creature that looked like a cross between a gorilla and a bear. Gigantopithecus lived in southern and Southeast Asia, hunting wild animals and occasionally eating fish. According to scientists, it was a kind of missing link between orangutans and modern humans. At the same time, however, Gigantopithecus was a kind of dead end in evolution. The thing is that the epoch in which it lived was incredibly short. In addition, the Earth experienced a major climate change. There was a real ice age, and Gigantopithecus simply could not adapt to such rapid changes. But this meant that humanity could develop normally and eventually conquer the entire planet. Well, it's hard to say that all these creatures were really scary, but they were definitely bizarre. Look at the plesiosaur. About 100 million years ago, it was one of the most common marine reptiles. It's easy to distinguish them from all the other monsters because instead of flippers, the plesiosaur had ordinary legs. And although it spent almost all its life in the water, it occasionally crawled out onto land. Only for that, it needed to push off with its powerful tail and make a somersault. Yeah, this marine reptile wasn't exactly agile on land. It was a real klutz. And who could have thought that the biggest brain among dinosaurs belonged to the smallest of them? Meet the Troodon. Its skull was only 18 centimeters long, but it was Troodon who was considered the smartest of all dinosaurs. With a brain weight of 30 cubic centimeters, this dinosaur was capable of serious tricks, like teaching animals to perform various tricks. And it was Troodon who was the first to domesticate birds. Don't believe me? Well, take a look at this petrified egg. In fact, it's so well preserved that we can clearly see the print of Troodon's footprint on it. In short, this dinosaur wasn't just smart, it was also incredibly strong. However, even this formidable predator was still inferior to the king of the dinosaurs, the mighty Tyrannosaurus rex. Unfortunately, this predator has been dead for over 65 million years. But don't be upset. Now you can watch it on our show.